Yes, we can.
Okay. There's not too much light next to me because of the window.
No, it looks just fine.
Great. Okay.
Nankhonde, let me just do a quick intro, just to guide you into the session and everyone else. Hi, everyone. My name is Lukonga Lindunda. I'm co-founder and executive director of Bongo Hive. We set up these webinars to be able to address specific aspects of running a business, especially in these times, which are very difficult. But in keeping with our tradition, we always look at how we can solve problems. And we recognize that even though we're unable to meet with entrepreneurs face-to-face in our programs and events, we still think we can cater to your needs via virtual platforms. And so these webinars are available on our website, bongohive.co.zm/webinars. And you will be able to access all the webinars. We scheduled some more webinars for the rest of the week, and we'll try as much to have one every day. And if you miss a webinar, you can also go on the website, bongohive.co.zm/webinars to access all the previously recorded webinars, and they're also available on YouTube. Our speaker today has a lot of experience in this space. The title of the webinar is Business Continuity Planning During COVID-19 for SMEs, and Nankhonde will be taking us through a 1-hour session to address this. The format for the session, she will have about 30 to 40 minutes for her presentation, and then we'll have Q&A. You will be allowed to ask questions via the chat function of the platform. So just look for a small chat icon on the right side of your top right side of your screen. You can type in your question, and I will be able to moderate the various questions. So welcome to the webinar. Nankhonde, thank you very much for making time. Over to you.
Thank you, Lukonga. You're welcome, and hello, everybody. I'm really, I feel quite privileged to be in this position with this knowledge, but also to share it. And in particular to this group of everybody who is on this webinar, because I am a graduate of the Bongo Hive Launch Accelerator, and it is through their support that my business has actually improved. And so I hope as we collectively go through these difficult times, this information may be of benefit to you to support you to sustain your business during this COVID-19 period. I am a serial entrepreneur, and I have two businesses. My primary business is as an executive coach and organizational change architect. So I support organizational development. My second business is a luxury handbag line that I started from scratch and launched last year, which is why, more importantly, this information is so relevant to how I'm going to sustain this recent launch, because I've made some business gains and there's a potential to lose them. I come with this knowledge because my previous experience working for the United Nations, I was fortunate to support the global response to avian influenza in 2008. And it is because of that work experience and a study I did on it that I am happy to share what I take from that study and the work experience in service to us as SMEs and in service to business, because that is the context and that is the area I believe we are facing many challenges in. So I will go into the presentation. And you let me know when you are able to see my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as discussed, this is about pandemic preparedness. And it is about how small businesses can use some information to structure their response to this. The structure of this presentation is I will do some definitions, and then I will take you through the elements of the plan, and then we will discuss what action do you need to do immediately. So that's why the order is define, plan, and act. So in terms of the definitions, this is starting with defining the current scenario. What are we dealing with? I'm not going to go into the clinical aspects of COVID-19 because I'm not qualified to do that. And I believe that the Ministry of Health has helped us with some information to understand this and in terms of our health and what measures we need to take as individuals to protect ourselves and our families. But what I will go into are the non-clinical aspects which are related to your business. And so COVID-19 through this presentation is being addressed as a risk to your business. In order to support getting onto the same page, I wanted to share a definition of business risk. And risk is something that I think we tend to consider larger companies being more affected by. And even in developing my business plan, and I remember my canvas, my business canvas with Bongo Hive, we had risks and we had to think through some risks. So it was, I must admit from my side, I didn't really think through that many because I was more focused on getting started and seeing what I could do. But risks are real, and risks are exposure for any size of company to factors that are beyond your control, but can affect your profits and actually potentially lead you to fail. And the sources of risks can be internal. It can be due to factors internally, either through people or processes, or it can be external factors, which could be people, processes, or environmental or natural disasters. Then a pandemic is a global outbreak of a disease. So not what we're used to seeing are diseases that are spread across regions, even countries. And at that point in time, the response from a disease perspective is localized, depending on the country. Now, the challenge of the pandemic, it is a disease that affects all countries at the same time. And that's what makes it difficult, because disease is the new warfare. And if we talk about, for example, what we've been used to seeing conflicts breaking out in different countries, you can see that responses and resources can be allocated to those areas to help deal with it. Now, if we look at disease outbreaks as well, when disease happens, a response and resources are allocated to that particular area. And for us locally, I would say, for example, cholera. The cholera areas, the responses that are taken. Now, a pandemic is an outbreak all over the world at the same time. This brings a challenge to maintaining operations, but also to how do you respond and act to it. And finally, the business continuity and recovery plan, which is the topic of this webinar, is the structured approach for the response. And that's where I hope you will get much value to help you understand what to do at this moment in time. So the risk of COVID-19 is really around appreciating pandemic scenarios. And I call them pandemic scenarios because as you have watched, as we have all watched, the situation has evolved in front of us. We have gone from no threat in the country, but we were watching what was happening in Wuhan province, and we started to see what was happening in Asia, then Europe and America. and then more closer to home in Africa and now the sub-region. So the no threat in country but present outside the country is where we have come from. And that's the first scenario. That is the situation where you are aware that there's a risk, but it's not close enough to you to currently worry about, but it's on your radar. The second pandemic scenario is a threat in country, but not significant. And I say this because the current scenario we are in and maybe graduating out of is scenario number 2. We have a declared and confirmed threat in country because the way from scenario 1, the WHO has pandemic scenarios, and depending on how the disease is spreading, they move from declaring this as a threat to finally confirming that it is a pandemic. And from there, we have a significant threat in the country because of the movement of the disease. And in order to respond to it, the government has guided us on taking measures to contain the disease. And one of the measures is through washing hands and the hygiene, but also social distancing. And that's what we're experiencing right now. Now, from this level, the idea is that if these measures implemented, each individual and all the stakeholders play their role, we should be able to contain it and delay the spread of the disease. Also, it means that as the disease was coming into the country, those cases coming in were quarantined and contained. The challenge then happens when you have low population to person movement of the disease, meaning it's not just the people bringing it in from outside, it's actually spreading within the country. So we are between scenario 2 and 3, which poses then a serious threat in country. And I know there have been discussions that we've all been privy to in terms of information of what does a lockdown mean? A lockdown basically means that the threat is serious. And that's why South Africa went into lockdown, because they were not able to contain, and social distancing, the impact was limited. I'm not going to go into the political decisions of how these are made. I'm just sharing the scenarios for the benefit of our planning. So a serious threat in country may lead to lockdown. And right now, a decision has not been made on whether Zambia is in lockdown, because there are a lot of implications in lockdown. But we have seen that certain places have been closed, disrupt and limit interactions, social interactions between people. So one threat has moved into lockdown, which is trying to delay the disease and spread the curve that they've been talking about. And spreading the curve is really about ensuring that as the disease moves through the population, the number of people who need attention and care from health services are spread over a period of time so that the health system can cope and so that other service providers can also cope. And then finally, the fourth scenario is post-crisis, getting out of the situation. When we go through the serious threat in country and lockdown, watching the way the response is happening in a way that now tells us that actually we are no longer at risk, the number of cases starts reducing, and we start to see a change in the scenario, and we start to see things like schools opening, social places opening. Then you start to appreciate that, okay, maybe we're coming out of the crisis, and that's why I put post-crisis, because that's the recovery from the situation. Now the plan. Your business continuity plan should look at 4 areas internally. And these are your strategy, operations, your finances, and your people, meaning your employees. And I'll take you through each one of these. Externally, it should be looking at your brand, the impact on your brand, the impact on your customers, and any other stakeholders who are involved in your business that you need to think about. And that will be dependent on the nature of your business. So your plan, from a strategic perspective, as you began the year, you probably had an idea of sales targets. You had an idea of what you wanted to achieve financially and in terms of volume of sales, or if it's services in terms of clients that you actually serve. So the way I've structured these 4 areas is to ask you a series of questions to think about, and the answers to these will help you develop the plan. So from a strategic perspective, look at what you plan to achieve this year and develop an annex or an attachment to those original figures so that you can adjust them according to the 4 pandemic scenarios. Remember, scenario 1 is no threat. Scenario 2 is a threat in the country, a serious threat. So according to the different scenarios, you have a response for your strategy. So no threat, for example, you won't adjust your targets because the threat is not in the country, but you're watching it, it's on your radar, but your sales are still going on. When it gets to serious threat, you start to see, okay, I've been selling maybe 20 vases every month consistently. Now people are not moving as much with social distancing. I'm noticing that how come I'm only selling 3 flower vases this month instead of 20? For example, in my first organizational development consultancy, I've been doing trainings for clients. I've noticed that there's a trend as my clients have become concerned. I've gone from maybe doing 5-6 trainings a month. I've been doing 2 gradually, and now to the point where I don't even have 1 because they're concerned and they're asking to postpone. So I need to revise my targets. My plan for 2020 was to say, I'm going to deliver X number of trainings, and I'm aiming to make X amount of profit after expenses. So then your strategy looks at the business side so that you can realistically and appreciate what you'll be able to achieve. The second part is your command and control situation. We are in a serious threat situation, so you do need to think about, against the 4 scenarios, what is your command and control chain for communication and decision making? Do you have a person who is able to run the business if anything happens to you? Who would you consider as a number 2? And for some of us who are sole traders, that's a bit challenging. I do have a team of 2, but at the same time, because of the nature of my SME, we're not at the mature stage where they can actually run the business. So this raises serious questions about, I'm in this situation, what do I do? How do I, first of all, define a trigger mechanism for actions to be taken as the situation of the disease evolves and the impact on my business evolves, but also who else knows about the business and who else needs to be with me as I'm making decisions so that we can get through all these 4 scenarios. And then the 4th part, that's the next part of your strategy, is the information and context. Who needs to know what when? Who in your team, who in your close circle needs to be advised in terms of the business and your own health in terms of what's happening. So what I've done, for example, is set up a WhatsApp group with my team to understand on a daily basis, just to check in as the situation is evolving. Previously, we were checking in as our normal planning sessions. Okay, this week we're training these clients, we're preparing these materials. Those are the nature of our meetings. Now we're meeting to discuss, okay, we've got these contracts cancelled. This is the situation in the country. Are you guys okay? Is there anything you need? And finally, even the contacts, we moved from meeting in person to now meeting online and meeting through WhatsApp. So always know how your staff and their families are doing. Internally, the second aspect is your operations. In the different phases or the different scenarios, you will need to make adjustments to your business processes and the supply chain. For example, providing training, so I'm in my first business, has had an impact because I have had to now consider training online. That requires changing the way I deliver, from me being in the room in front of people to now me being virtually present. And what has that required? That has meant I've had to also address my supply chain. I need actually new resources and technology to help me put into place what I need to teach online. But also, how do I get the student manuals and the printing materials to the students? So these are things operationally have been disrupted. From my handbag business, I thank God that the first collection was ready and delivered in January. But you can imagine having to bring in the handbags from the manufacturer in a time like this, when planes are grounding, borders are closing, and it's basically a non-essential operation. And so in this process, the second part of your plan looks at what are the critical points in your business process map. And a business process map is a definition of every step of how you produce or sell your service. And it's a way of understanding step by step which parts of it will be disrupted in order for you to sustain your business. So I use the business process map to help me identify where I need to make changes and what is going to be impacted. And finally, if from an operational perspective, we've been told about what to do as individuals, but in the office, what information do your staff need? Do you need to rearrange the plan of the office because you can't send everybody home, those who are in the office? Do you need to move how they sit? Do you need to add water stations and soap for them to wash their hands? Are there any compliance issues if you're producing consumables? What are the different things that may be affected for your operations to continue? And at the same time, remember, we are managed or we are supervised by regulators. In your business, is there anything in the adjustments you need to make to your operations that will now put you in breach with a regulator? And so these are the things that you need to consider. The next part is your finances. And for me, this has been critical because I'm just getting to the point where I thought the business is growing, I am making sales, and I'm getting excited about, what is the next growth for the business. And then COVID-19 happens. So from a financial perspective, you have to understand what is the cost of the operational changes you need to make now. And I'm advising, project them for the next 3 months or even up to 6 months. I'm not saying that this is going to take 6 months, but in order to be prepared, think about a scenario where you are planning for 6 months, and if everything is over within 3 months, you're fine. The challenge is that even as the pandemic evolves over a period and we get to the peak and then it starts coming down, remember the recovery period is not automatic and it doesn't happen immediately. So even those 3 months, imagine another 2 months after in terms of planning, just to help you get to some new level of normal. And that's why I'm saying consider 3 months as a priority, but even if you can, stretch it to 6 months so you understand by the end of the year what's happening with my business. The financial aspect also supports you to understand, is there anybody who has given you a loan or has given you some financing that is tied to your deliverables, that is tied to investments? Make sure that you are aware of this and you contact them to reprogram key result areas that are in your agreement, or even to ask them to reallocate some of the funding in order for you to be able to sustain the current situation. They will be able to consider that it's not business as usual and the plans you had made with them are not sustainable in this current context. The other area for finances is understanding from how your businesses or the nature of your business, how are your clients going to pay you? So in terms of my bags, for example, I've finally managed to get a contract earlier this year with the Soccer Collective to stock my bags. I received my first statement from them with sales. But the challenge is the Soccer Collective has now had to close in response to this. So how do my clients get their products? And if they've already received products, for example, I've already done some trainings, how are they going to pay me? Because they are reallocating their priorities and money. Do I need to discuss new terms with the clients? Do I need to discuss new terms in terms of how they will pay, or if payments will be considered differently during this period? And then for other types of clients, if they can't get to you, there's the mobile payment system. So, people at this stage may try some funny things, but we have different ways of getting payments without even having to meet each other. But my main point here is to consider if your service has direct payments from clients upon delivery of service or in advance, think about the plan of how you're going to get that money. And in particular, get that money now that is owed, because if they are not operating over the next few weeks or months, they are not gaining revenue, which means their chances of paying you starts to dwindle the more we go into this. The other aspect is the bank, and I think this is linked to the finances as well, but there's also commercial banks. If you need to negotiate any credit lines, your loans, your overdraft, this is the time to do it. In addition to the banks and finances, there are the regulators, there's ZRA. This is an opportunity to just put in a letter quickly to explain the whole country is in this situation of COVID-19. We are waiting for guidance in the same way that other countries have provided guidance to their business sector, the private sector, on how they're going to deal with tax liabilities and how they're going to deal with other areas. In the meantime, there's no harm already to put a letter in there or put a note into ZRA to explain the current situation so that you have something in there when you are getting into difficulties and have liabilities being incurred. This also goes to your landlord. If you're renting, you need to get in touch with your landlord. How far can you pay rent over the next few months if you're not earning income? What do you need to negotiate with the landlord now? And even them with their understanding that we're all in this. Maybe the landlord might not be so happy about this. And the worst case scenario is that they ask you to leave in difficult circumstances. I would say prepare for the worst case scenario so that you're ready. There's no harm in already thinking about plan B if you need to. And then the final aspect of your finances really looks at your ability to survive. So your working capital, can you actually fund salaries and operations for 3 months, at most 6 months? Can you actually continue to charge the same prices? We've already seen what has been happening with the masks. I had to go and buy masks and they've gone from 3 kwacha. The one I bought, the paper ones were 15 and the stronger solid ones are now 39 kwacha. Imagine. So if your budget had certain materials or inputs that you buy at a fixed cost, imagine that the prices may have changed. You want to check that so that you adjust the cost of your inputs for whatever you're producing as products or even in services. The final part for finances I will close on is about projecting losses to the business. I've already started to do that. It's just realistic to understand that business has gone down in some areas, and you need to think about what can you, what amount do you think you're going to lose in terms of the value of sales, and what is the implication for the business. The next area are your people, and that's the fourth part of the scenario. Is to understand your people. You know, who should go home now? And in some cases, you know, you may, it's not, given the projection on losses, the projection on sales, you may find that you may not even be able to keep them. These are difficult conversations. And so you need to start thinking about having them now. What are the implications for your business? If you can't afford to pay staff, but you're keeping them working on goodwill, these are things we need to start thinking about. If you have health insurance, does your health insurance cover COVID-19? Are there limits to the type of services they will provide? And is there an envelope? Is there a maximum amount of money they will spend? Have this information in advance so that you can protect yourself, and also you can even advise your staff. If you don't give them health insurance, let them check with their own providers. As we know, as SMEs, a lot of us are in two places. We either have health insurance that we pay for privately, or we do the out-of-pocket payments, meaning when there's a need, that's when you pay. And so that's the challenge also with some of the people we may be working with, that it's out of pocket. And that's we really need to discuss what needs to be anticipated in terms of health needs, given the nature of the virus and what people are suffering from. In addition to taking care of your employees, understand who are your critical staff, who actually in your business process needs to stay on to continue the business, who can go home, because you need to set aside a budget that looks at the worst case scenario. What if 20% of my staff or 50% of my staff fall ill, or worst case, God forbid, die? As business owners, you have a responsibility to anybody who has an employment with you. But you also have to think about this for yourselves. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I think the key there is to just start thinking about budgeting and anticipating certain types of expenses that are related to the nature of this threat we're facing. And finally, continue to share and communicate only the official response information. There's a lot of fake news and information circulating, which I feel is doing more damage than good. Okay. So when I look at the, sorry, I'm going to go back to this slide. The 4 areas of the internal plan are the areas that I have extracted the most information around. But I also mentioned 3 other areas, which are the external side. And for these, I will just speak to them. Having looked at your 4 areas, you will then understand what are the implications for your brand. What does this mean in terms of sustaining the visibility of your brand? And what does it mean in terms of really living the values of your brand? So for example, if your brand talks about we serve the community, you know, are you actually doing this at this point in time? It doesn't have to be actions that incur costs, but it may be sharing messages, it may be sending out motivation and lifting up morale, maybe joining prayers, whatever it is. What is your brand doing that actually also activates your values? At the same time, your brand messaging has to also flow with the current context. So for example, you may be able, if you're communicating through social media and you're selling things, you can't ignore the fact that we're facing a threat of COVID-19. So if you're selling spare parts for cars, if you're selling dresses, whatever it is that you're doing, and you continue to sell, and maybe you've moved on to online sales and people are able to look at your products and you can deliver, your brand should also be responsible and share messages about the current situation, but also understand that the limited visibility of your brand in normal terms is amplified during pandemic times because people are not necessarily looking for you or looking for information because their priorities have shifted. And that takes me to your customers. Your customers' priorities may have shifted. They are worried about themselves, and they're worried about their families, and they're even worried about their own businesses and their workplaces. So in terms of the external impact on your brand, your customers, you need to start thinking about, with these 4 areas that I've defined, what are the implications for my customers? Are they going to slow down in the way they're coming? That will be reflected in your finances. What are they thinking right now about my product? Is it an essential or non-essential item? What message can I send to my customers? Do I have a mailing list? Do I have a WhatsApp group? What can I just send to them? And I think large organizations are quite good at doing this. They've been sending out messages, like the banks, to their customers to say, during this time of COVID, we're thinking of you. You know, even as small businesses, I've sent out messages to my clients just to remind them that I'm here and that afterwards they must come back and give me business. I understand now that their priorities may have shifted, but you keep communication with your customers. And finally, the 3rd area of other stakeholders is about who else do you need to consider in your business that needs information from you about your ability to operate. It may be maybe a charity you're supporting. It may be people who do peace work for you. And this is important because as an SME, I've actually used peace workers temporarily to help me through certain things. So they can anticipate that at this moment, I don't, even if I had the need to give them work, I don't anticipate to have the resources. So other stakeholders are other people you must think about who you need to get into contact. So for me, that is the plan. Internally, look at your strategy, operations, finances, and people. Externally, look at your brand, customers, and other stakeholders. And finally, I would just like to take you to the last slide, which is we need to act now. We are already between scenario 2 and 3. The challenge with going into scenario 3 and the debates that we've heard are real because lockdown has implications on the different categories of earners who earn daily, who earn monthly. You know, it's quite a challenge for hand-to-mouth, our marketeers, our other traders, you know, or even some of us whose business actually is not as fluid as a full-time job with a mature, established organization. And so the moving into scenario 3 is quite a challenge. So I would advise you now to conduct a business impact assessment against the 4 business areas: strategy, operations, finance, and people, and develop your response to the different areas. Start with the current scenario we are in. The reason I'm saying develop for the 4 areas, because although we've passed the stage of no threat, this experience actually exposes to us what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses in our business on a good day. And those would be then the reflection of the plan in scenario 1. When you've developed your plan also, because you need to think internally and externally, think about, are there any new business streams that you can actually come up with that the current situation needs? For example, is there a service or a product that you provide that is actually needed now? So there's an opportunity to innovate. There is a flip side to this situation, that whilst there is a crisis also has products and services that it needs. So in your plan, think about any innovation or any new services or revenue streams that you have discovered because of the situation, and put it in your plan. Because when you get to scenario 4, you will have to look at your strategy moving forward into 2021 and how you're going to recover the business in terms of targets and sales, because 2021 may be a year of just trying to get restabilized as a business. And then in terms of your operations, looking forward into 2021, your recovery, maybe you've learned something on your operations that you can do differently. In terms of your finances, moving into 2021, your recovery will be, how much do I need to, so how much money do I possibly need to borrow? How much money do I need? What amount of time do I need to invest so that I take away salaries? And how much of the work do I need to do myself to turn the business around? And in terms of your people, moving forward into 2021 recovery, how many people can I afford to keep to run the business? So these are realities about the 4 scenarios. So develop your plan now, inform your team, and you have an opportunity with this information to start implementing the plan now. It is a difficult situation, we all recognize that, but we will get through this. The more we can support each other, the more we can apply some of these steps. I'm not saying that this is exhaustive and this is the best guidance for you. I'm sharing it in the spirit of being also affected by it and having some knowledge that I would like to contribute to seeing us all at the end of the year, at the other side of this, with an opportunity to continue to live our dreams and grow the businesses to the vision we had originally planned. Thank you.
Nankhonde, thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I've learned so much from it already. I know we had a call last week, which led to having this webinar. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to share it with the rest of the world. For everyone who's watching or listening, please type in your question. If you have a question in the chat function on the top right corner of your screen, there is a chat function there, so you can ask a question there, type it, and then I'll moderate the questions. And if you don't have any questions, we could also continue planning our businesses in light of COVID. So any questions, please just type them in the chat function. We'll give it about 30 seconds. If there are no more questions, we will proceed and close the session for today. We have other webinars that we've scheduled for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we have a session on remote work in Africa in the digital media space at 11 a.m. And on Friday as well, we have a session on handling your mental well-being, mental health during this crisis with Dr. Maria Akani. So if there are no more questions from the viewers or participants, I would like to, okay, there's one question. Is it possible to access the presentation offline? Nankhonde, well, I mean, from Bonga's perspective, it will be, the video will be uploaded on the website. Nankhonde, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, the presentation will be sent immediately after this to Bongo Hive, and it's available to anybody. And it also will have my email and my phone number. Again, this is mutual support. I may not have all the answers, But I'm making myself available to anybody who would like to ask any questions further specific to your own plan.
Thank you. And since everyone's registered via Eventbrite, we have your email addresses, so we will be able to share the presentation with you all. There's another question there. Natasha says, yesterday I had a WhatsApp chat with SMEs I'm working with in Kasama, and the sad part is they say companies are also unable to work with farmers due to the social distancing. What can we do to help this problem?
Yes, that's a challenge. And I think it depends on the company's own level of readiness or preparedness for the situation we're in. And so as companies are preparing themselves, that is the internal part, then they're able to deal with the external part. And honestly, I don't know how the agricultural sector works from a commercial perspective other than being a consumer. So I would not have all the answers, but I would say if you are able to advise them on any measures that they can take themselves in Kasama, that will make the farmers or the people buying for them more comfortable that they've taken measures to protect themselves, maybe that will help.
Yeah, there's another question here from Matimba. In light of the points you've raised on being innovative and taking up emerging business opportunities, would you recommend rechanneling financial resources from a current business's income stream to invest in new opportunities?
You would still need to do your business evaluation, the viability, the sales during this, possibility of sales afterwards, understand who your customer is, understand what your inputs are to produce. And so I would say, whilst it may sound like an opportunity, if you don't do the process of understanding the customer, the cost of goods for you to produce it or provide it as a service, and your potential break even or profit in this, you may be putting yourself at risk. And I say this in light of what we've just seen at Madison, which is totally unrelated, where a core business invests in a subsidiary that does not actually go on to meet its potential and puts the core business at risk. So all I'm saying is don't put your core business at risk. Do the homework first. If you think it's viable, then I would invest.
Okay, there don't seem to be, there are no more questions for now, but I think generally speaking, the feedback from people who are typed in on chat is quite positive. I think people are really happy with the presentation. Bongani is asking, how are you managing your team's expectations with regard to their job security and employer-employee relationship in light of working capital challenges for the next 3 to 6 months?
I would advise you to look at the labor laws, because remember the new labor law, I think is, I'm not sure if it has taken effect or will take effect. So you've got this legal framework that already has terms and conditions in it that you need to comply to. So check that. And if you need to check anything with the labor office, contact them. On the other side, look at your finances and your capital for operations and salaries. Because normally, in roughly the order we pay things is really the salaries, statutory obligations, and then operations. So look at the realistically, what can you afford to do? And I think this is leadership. You know, this is calling us all to lead in our businesses. You've got to make the difficult decisions. And if you are not able to sustain somebody, you can pay them this month, but you're not sure in 2 months if this goes on. The key is to communicate to them and let them know so that you get into an agreement that at this certain point in time, I will have to give you some information about the situation. And if the situation is okay, I am okay to continue for 1 month, 2 months. If the situation is not good, unfortunately, I will have to give you your 1 month's notice. So in your working capital, you still need to give your notice period. So prepare for the budget for that. But it's communication. You know, the challenge with the pandemic is that the target keeps moving. So you have no point in time specific when this is going to end. Our best case scenario is that they find a vaccine to this or they find a drug for this. Our best case scenario is that the spread locally is contained, and that we're able to recover and businesses start opening and we move quickly into business as normal. Our worst case scenario is that it prolongs and that the peak of the virus is very high and that it really takes a toll on all of our businesses. So prepare, communicate, but also legally protect yourself. Over.
There's a question, I was hoping there would be more clarity, but Mpangela is asking how you would suggest they plan if the critical staff member is the owner of the business.
My current situation, it's tough. This is where my husband knows, he knows my business, he knows what I do. And I've had to share with him a bit more detail on my strategy, my financial status, because somebody else has to know, and somebody you trust, somebody who's close to you. So I've had to share, and he hasn't seen this. He doesn't see my bank balances. He doesn't know my loans. So it's got now into delicate conversations of this is actually the financial health of the business. You need to know this. Because if anything happens to you, remember, there's a time when this will end. The banks don't understand any other language than we want our money. So you have to make sure that you put the business in a way that the information is available to somebody, or you just write it down. You communicate to your bank, you communicate to whoever you need to in your supply chain. Maybe you have credit lines, just to communicate to them that this is the situation. I'm anticipating no changes over the next 3 months, or I'm anticipating the following changes. I would like these payment terms, but it's actually on you. Because you are the only person, the onus is on you. And in case of some situations, you may decide now that I have to take the major decision as the situation evolves to eventually just take a pause from the business, close for now, and reopen because I can't manage. Even that is a potential response in itself, and it is a responsible response. It's a difficult one, I won't lie, but I'm in it. And as I evolve and work through it, I'm happy to share information about how I'm coping. Over.
Maybe just a question that I can ask while I wait for more questions from participants. We are seeing that staff members now have to go home with some of the equipment. I mean, starts off with a laptop, but then, a staff member may not have a chair at home to work and sit and be productive. And I'm wondering how far you can go, because the company has to be productive still. But if there's a lockdown and people can't get to the office, how do you handle a situation now where you now need to start moving some pieces of equipment into staff members' homes to just remain productive? How should SMEs handle that?
So the first part is, are you insured? Because now there's workplace insurance. And to be honest, even myself as an SME, this has not been a priority. It only became a priority later when I started to invest in significant assets to grow the business. And so consider what assets you have, and if you have a record of them. An asset database is very simple. It's just a record. It can be a piece of paper. It can be an Excel sheet. It can be a software. It doesn't matter. But you must understand all your assets, the value. And if you have insurance for those, that's great. Because if they go out to the employee, make sure your insurance policy actually covers them being in your employee's house, because things can go missing. At the same time, if it's a reality of you being able to sustain operations, understand what is the added value of that equipment in the hands of the employee and the revenue it will potentially provide. That's where I would start to think about how your business processes work and whether this is an essential process. And in order to sustain the essential process, you have to give this equipment to the employee, then you do it. But there's a risk, and you do it giving a risk. So when things start going wrong, you can't blame the employee. The risk falls back on you, and you understand that risk as you hand over the equipment. but as much as possible, label everything, tag everything, and make them sign for it, so that when this is over, you also now do your inventory when the equipment is called back. Over.
Thanks for that. I have another question. There's so much information out there. I mean, I can literally get on CNN and see what's happening in America, down to which businesses are shutting down, where, how. And if I just focus on what the Ministry of Health is saying, they might be, I mean, I might see it as there's some inaction, or there's a way that the information is communicated that for businesses may be difficult to easily make a decision, because government, of course, has taken into consideration millions and millions of people, whereas a business is 5 or 10 or 10 or 20 people. How do you suggest that we go about assessing the risk in the context of a global environment where we see what's happening in China, Italy, the US, South Africa, and you start asking yourself, okay, if we are here now, we're at this stage in the pandemic, what should I do next based on the information sources I have? How should entrepreneurs assess all these information sources and make the decisions that they need to make for their business, even if, you know, we have different stakeholders making various decisions and communicating in a particular way that's useful for them and not necessarily for your own business?
Thank you. I would, the reason I put this presentation together in this way is because it begins with the actual pandemic scenarios, meaning it actually starts from the source of this threat or the situation at hand, and then helps with the structure of how to respond as a business. I'm saying this because irrespective of the information you're receiving, you have a picture of what is the best case scenario in here and what is the worst case scenario. Do not wait for anybody to put together your response and plan. Now, we are a developing country, it's a reality. And so the priority at a national level has really focused, and in every country, it always starts like that. The health aspects, the clinical side is the priority, because they need to figure it out. They need to know what they need to do and they need to respond. So that is always a priority. And then you've noticed over time, suddenly the private sector started engaging. The governments were also engaging with the private sector to make, contributions to make their services available to the response. Now, the private sector responds in different ways. It can respond collectively through groups such as Zambia Chamber of Commerce. It can respond collectively through organizations like Bongo Hive, like you've done here, like PEP Zambia, like they have partnered also to come on board to listen to this as well. So there's different responses. At the moment, though, the private sector response is fragmented, and it's not as coordinated and organized nor financed the way it is in the West, because we are a developing country. And the reality is we are on our own from our business perspective in terms of making the decisions, but getting the right information to make them. Whilst the government and the larger private sector comes forward with information to support us. And this may be in the form of certain relief packages, from a developing country perspective. Maybe they can't give us grants. I heard Germany is giving 5,000 euros or something. Don't quote me. I don't want to spread the wrong news if I read it correctly, but they're giving small businesses financing, some money to help cushion this. So we may get something like a tax relief, which is why I think it's important to get your note into ZRA, and that's if you're paying taxes, to get your note into ZRA to confirm that your business is going to be impacted by the situation, so that eventually, as the government coordinates its effort with bodies like Zambia Chamber of Commerce, they will come up with a package that is relevant to the situation of our developing country, that they can support us. And you can see even individuals in the private sector who have the wealth have come forward in other countries to support. And so for me, part of this effort and coming forward is, let's try and get organized, and let's move away from fragmented support to the private sector, whatever size the industry is, because we don't have enough support and information out there on how we're going to ride this wave.
Thank you so much. Then no more. Oh wow, this is one last question. And Matimba is asking, any tips on how to maintain motivation and positive work ethic among team members during these difficult and uncertain times?
I'm using this time to pray a lot, pray together. I'm using this time also to show leadership. And so the more you are visibly appreciating the situation and communicating, the more sort of reassurance you give them. And so even sharing motivational messages about, how difficult times strengthen us, when you get to the other side, you're not the same, and supporting people in their own lives. You see, my challenge with my team has been that the impact is only as great as they are organized in their lives. So the potential impact for them personally is the fear that they're showing. And so one of the tools I've done is to help them also get prepared in terms of this year. So you bought this plot and you wanted to build. Maybe it won't happen now, but it will happen. So you understand what I mean. A lot of keeping up the spirits is in helping them have a more of a defined, not necessarily formal plan for their lives for this year and the next year, and their goals and their targets. The threat to them is that they will not be able to meet their personal goals, and it's being expressed through you as the employer. So it's to support them in their own goals, to adjust to their own targets, reallocate their own resources, and make sure home is okay. So supporting them to make sure home is okay. What have they done to, make sure that they're following the hygiene messages? What have they spoken to their landlord? Different things like that, but at an individual level, to help them also plan their lives. Otherwise, the impact falls back on you because you are now the face of the immediate threat, because you might be in a position to have to let them go. I hope that makes sense.
We are just a minute away from reaching our limit, but thank you so much again for the presentation and for answering the questions very well. We're looking forward to you interacting with our listeners and participants going forward. Just to reiterate, the recording will be up on the website tomorrow morning. It's bongohive.co.zm/webinars, WEBINARS. And we also have a webinar tomorrow morning, same time at 11 a.m. And the topic for tomorrow is remote work in Africa in the digital media space. So we know that it's challenging working remotely. We see all this happening across the globe, but we have our own challenges with things like load shedding and sort of expensive internet, as in some cases quite slow. And we are hoping that the session tomorrow will help address and help you understand some of the tools you can use and also some of the methodologies you can use to work remotely. On Friday, we have a session on mental health with Dr. Maria Akani, and the idea behind that is it's challenging, of course, to work from home in this challenging time, and it's important that we have our mental health in check. And you can register for all those sessions again on the website. The link has been shared in the chat function, and we hope to see you and chat with you tomorrow morning and the next day as well. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks,
May I say something before we close?
Sure.
I just wanted to put out there as well, this is a potential threat on the current situation, but it is not necessarily a threat for the vision that you have for yourself for the next 5 years. It just affects how you're going to get there. So it's important that you put this in the context of your 5-year plan and understand that in the plan, 2020 will only be able to contribute X in the different areas to it. Because as much as this is about your business, it's also about your life and the vision you have for you and your family over the next 5 years. So I would look at it in the context of the bigger picture to have a target for where you want to be in 5 years and understand what this current situation does to delay maybe some aspects of it, but continue the plan, because although the route to the vision changes, the vision does not change. You will still need to get to where you want to be in 5 years and think outside the box about how you're going to get there. Over. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, Nankhonde. Thanks, everyone.